get out your notes there for lesson 43. Open them in Notability here. We get Elijah and Ahab. So this is our first story about the great prophet Elijah. You have your timelines too, and there's a couple of new worksheets for you for lessons 43 through 45. So you can fill in those kings, but on the side you see the prophets. So make sure you put Elijah in there too, and you can see what he had to work with. God put him on this earth to work at a time with Ahab. All right, so we read 1 Kings there, end of chapter 16 and 17. So we put a few things here. First of all, at the verse right before we started, it talked about Omri, and he had died. Okay, but what city had he built or started to build that would become the new beautiful capital city of Israel? Courtney? Yeah, Samaria. Okay. So he had built the city of Samaria. That's going to be the new capital city of Israel. And Ahab is one of the first kings that really, we read a lot about things happening in Samaria. Okay. We also should know King Ahab started his reign towards the end of the reign of Asa of Judah. So again, when you have your timeline, you can look down and you can see, oh yeah, Asa was king towards the end of his time that he was ruling, but Ahab begins to be king of Israel at this time. So a few points here to make sure that we get. But anyways, so Ahab becomes king, and he is in no way a godly man at all. So what does he begin to do? Well, he looks at what some of the kings have done before him and what they have lived for a lifestyle. And what do you think he begins to build? He looks back at those kings and says, well, they had a good time. They had fun. So, Micah? Yeah. He began to lead the people in idol worship. He too would make idols to Baal and to Ashtaroth and to other gods. Okay. He would do that too. Now, king often, he's a queen. He needs to get married. So I'm sure they had quite a production of a wedding, of course. But this queen, of all of the different queens, kind of stands out. We don't know who Omri's wife was. We don't know about Zimri. The Bible doesn't tell us. But it does tell us quite a bit about Ahab, because who did he marry? Joe? Jezebel? Yeah. Probably quite an event, because we know that from later on she's very earthly. She's very full of and concerned about things of this earth and beauty, so I'm sure it was an extravagant event, you can imagine. And sadly, she was no godly woman. She was a very, very wicked woman. And she began Baal worship in Israel. And she probably took her gods with her. Put them, you can see her placing them in the temple, or in the palace there, putting them up on the mantle or in some prominent place in all the rooms so that Baal could be worshipped each and every day. Okay. Sadly, the people of Israel, then they had forgotten the joyful worship of Jehovah. You know, they left that. They didn't have that in their daily lives. They saw their leaders leading them in wicked worship, so they didn't do that. Now, what was the first city, if you remember, what was the first city that had been conquered by the Israelites when they came into the land of Canaan? Garrett.
Jericho.
It was Jericho. Okay. So they conquered Jericho, and what was the curse that God had given after that city was destroyed? What did he tell the people?
You can't rebuild it.
Can't rebuild it? Well, that was his commandment. What would happen to Faith?
The foundation was laid, the oldest son would die, and once the gates were put up, the youngest son would die.
Correct. as the city was rebuilt, their family members would die. That was the curse. Their sons would die. Well, we see here that during this time of King Ahab, Jericho was rebuilt by a man named Hiel. Hiel. He rebuilds the city of Jericho. Now Elijah, he's been called by God. He's been anointed as a prophet. And it's his duty now to make sure that the people of Israel are living a godly life, but also to direct their rulers. That's a great responsibility for him. And well, it's time for him to begin working with Ahab. Now, before we go on, what does Elijah's name mean? Does anybody know? What is the meaning of Elijah's name? What's the meaning of his name? Micah? Yes? That would be a great guess because he is a messenger, but no, that's not what it is. Katie? Nicole? No. All good guesses. My God is Jehovah. So, what a beautiful name to say, my God is Jehovah. That's who my God is, because if we look at this time, that's not what Ahab or Jezebel or most of the people of Israel sadly could even say. They would have to say, my God is Baal, or my God is Ashtaroth, or my God is somebody else. But Elijah here is a beautiful light in Israel. His name means my God is Jehovah. Now what did God command or give Elijah the powers to do here in this chapter? What did he do to the land of Israel? Garrett?
He stopped the rainfall.
Stop the rainfall. So you can imagine being a farmer. Year after year you go out and you plant your crops. Rains would come and the crops would grow up, and then you would go out and you would harvest those crops. And you could consistently depend on the rains. Just like here we could depend there's going to be a certain amount of rain in the spring. And then we usually get a long summer where there might not be very much. And then we can usually depend that as the seasons start changing, we'll get a little bit more rain in the fall. Okay? Well, that didn't happen this year in Israel. There was no rain. Probably the farmers went out and planted their seeds, and there was no rain. The plants wouldn't even sprout. The fields stayed barren. And so, what does that mean for the people now, Joe? Yeah, they're going to be hungry. They're going to have no food. They're going to be hungry in their lands. Okay? Because the heavens had stopped raining. The rivers are going to dry up. So many of the cattle are going to be thirsty. And there's going to be fights probably over who gets the water and what land. Right? Irrigation. There might be some fights about who and how much you can irrigate. So all those things. But why did this happen? Well, again, it was part of God's plan, and God is showing, I am in control, Israel. Not the other gods that you're worshiping. Go ahead, pray to Baal. Pray to Asherah. See if they can bring the rain. And of course, you can see the people doing that each and every day. Did it bring any rain, Faith? Will bring no rain as at all. Okay? But Ahab, he was stubborn. He's probably one of the more stubborn men that we'll come across this year. And he, of course, refuses to admit that it's God of Jehovah of heaven. Instead, he says, well, it's Baal that brings all the blessings. Now, of course, is Ahab real happy with Elijah? Kimberly? Now, really, none of us would be happy. If we knew somebody was intentionally doing something that was making our lives difficult or miserable, well, we would go and we would confront them on it. And you have to remember, back then, it's very well possible. I mean, even though God's law said, thou shalt not kill, that's something that probably crossed Ahab's mind. If I kill this guy, then I'll be done with it. Or maybe I won't kill him, I'll put him in prison and he can languish there. Well, that's not what God's will was. So where did Elijah run to go hide and to get away? Courtney?
Cherith.
Yeah, he ran and hid by the brook Cherith. Place he could be safe from Ahab. If Ahab was searching for Elijah, the men would not go there. God, just like Jesus could walk out of the midst of a group of men who wanted to throw rocks at him, and God caused them so that their minds and their eyes could not see Jesus. He could get away from them. So God can protect Elijah here at the brook Cherith, and no one came and bothered him while he was there. So a nice thing for Elijah is it is a time of rest. He probably had been working very hard as a prophet, speaking to the people and teaching the people, and now that's not the case. So how did God care for Elijah while he's there? Micah?
He sent ravens to bring him meat.
Alright. Ravens. God sent ravens to bring meat to the prophet each day. He could obviously get water there from the brook. So God sent ravens to bring him and provide his daily food. Beautiful picture. And we too, makes us realize we can depend upon God for, doesn't mean, well, I'll go sit in that field over there and when I'm hungry 3 days from now, God better send me something. That's not the case. It's not the way God provides for us unless He maybe sent us somewhere specifically. But in this case, that's what Elijah does. Finally, the brook dries up. You can imagine Elijah each and every day watching that brook, and there's getting less and less and less water because no rain is coming. Till finally, he wakes up one morning, and there's not a trickle of water to be found in the creek anymore. The water is gone, and it's dried up. And we know we can't live very many days without water. So God comes to Elijah, and He tells him to go visit a widow in what city? What city does he have to go visit? Joe? Zarephath. Go to a widow in Zarephath, and she will care for you, Elijah. Elijah had been alone out there by the brook Cherith. It was nice to not have to worry about losing your life, but at the same time it was a very lonely place. So you can imagine the excitement Elijah had as there's someone I can be with, I can talk to. And not only is it just anybody, it's a child of God. So even though we've never met, we know we'll have some things in common. We'll be able to discuss things with them and pray with them and eat with them and praise God with them. So that brought joy to Elijah. The bad thing was, this woman, she had a room in the house for Elijah to stay, but what was her problem? What did she lack? Just like everybody else in Israel lacked. She lacked, Courtney. Yeah, she had only one cake left. The Bible tells us she only had enough to make one cake, enough flour and oil, combine them together and bake a nice little loaf of bread, or as they call it, a cake. And that's it. As their last meal. Something we can't imagine, that we sit down tonight, food that's on our table, that there's just a little amount, and that's it. We go to the cupboards and they're bare. We go to the stores and there's nothing there. It's not the type of land we live in anymore. God has richly blessed us. But here, that's it. So this is their last meal. And, well, if you think about it, we talked about it in the devotions more, we would probably be selfish and we want to keep that cake for ourselves, not give it to anybody else. But here, this poor widow and her son willingly give it to Elijah. They give the cake to Elijah for him to eat. That means she and her son is going to go hungry. But what does Elijah have her do then? What miracle happens here? Joel?
God made the barrel of flour.
Yeah, infinite. It never ended. So it didn't fill up the barrel, but every time, if you go home and if you're maybe doing a little baking and you scoop into the sugar and you notice it's getting low, you scoop in there, there's always seems to be a little bit in there when you bring the new bag and pour it in. It's not completely empty unless it's been dumped up, but there's usually a little bit left in there. So we can imagine that you go into the barrel and you scoop out enough flour for a cake. And you see there's a little left in there. Maybe you don't think about it and you come back the next day, there's just enough down in there to make a little bit more bread. God always provided for this widow so that there's always enough, little bit of flour left in that barrel that she could make a cake of bread. And there was always a little oil left. She never ran out of oil. God provided enough so that every day they were blessed with food. And again, just like Elijah had been provided by the brook, here God is providing for Elijah and the widow and her son here in Zarephath. And Elijah promised her that even if he left, this would continue until when? When will this continue till? Jesse?
Famine ended.
Till the famine ended. Once the famine ended, then they would be able to once again obviously get their own bread and oil from other places of flour. Alright, and then the final thing in today's lesson here. So, what a beautiful thing. This widow and her son now know they'll never go hungry. Might not have very much, but they'll never go hungry. God provides their daily bread. We pray that in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread, and that's what it means. That's all we really need. It's just enough to live. We have so much more. But anyways, sadly, what happens to the widow's son? Micah? Yeah, the widow's son dies. We don't know from what. It doesn't give us all the particulars. Was it sudden? Was it overnight? It doesn't matter. All that matters is that, sadly, her son died. So now she's alone. Now she's lost her husband. And now she's lost her son. And she has no one more. And who's going to care for her once Elijah leaves? Well, God provides a way for that. Elijah asks for her son and takes the son to his own room. His own room. And there, Elijah is with this young boy, and he stretched himself on the young boy, and he prays. How many times to God? How many times did he pray? Emma?
3 times.
Prayed 3 times. He prays 3 times to God to deliver. So you can imagine him there sitting next to the bed or laying on and praying. And it's not just any prayer. It's a deep, wholehearted, heartfelt prayer for this young boy. And God does a miracle. And what happens after the prayer? Nicole? Alright, the boy is brought back to life. And then this strengthens not only the widow's faith, because she sees how faithful God has been to her, first with the bread, now with her son. And Elijah too is encouraged to know that God is in control of all things. If he can raise a person from the dead, the son, then God too can do many other miracles and wonders. And we'll see that during the great time of Elijah's work as a prophet. Now, there's one question here at the end. Was Elijah lonely at the brook? Now, this is a type of question that you could say yes, or you could say no, but you need to be able to prove it. Okay? Like we talked about, not writing down a bunch of answers with just a little fluff there. So, how could we say, yes, Elijah was very lonely? Why would you say he's lonely, Micah?
He was the only person there.
He's the only person there, so that makes somebody lonely. But what else about that, about being there? Not only was he lonely because he was all by himself, but what type of person probably would he long to be with? Doesn't want just any old person to come up and sit and chat with them. Nicole?
Someone who believes in God.
Yeah, he was not only lonely because he was by himself, but he was also separated from the true church. He was away from any of God's people. So there's 2 types of loneliness we can see there. There's a loneliness, yes, because he's by himself, but he's also lonely because he is, well, he's away, he's apart from the church. There's no godly communion that he can have and fellowship. And that's something God teaches us. We shouldn't go be a hermit off in a hill somewhere living up, but we need to be part of the church. That's an essential part of our life, of fellowship and friendship and communion. But you could say that Elijah was not alone at the brook. How could you prove that? Maybe you say, no, he wasn't alone. Katie?
Because God was with him.
Yes, God was with him. That's something that we say too. He was alone physically, but spiritually God was with him. God was caring for him. And so Elijah knew that God would always care for him and watch over him and would give him his daily bread and his needs that he had. So, again, you can see, sure, somebody could answer either way. There's not really a right answer necessarily if this is on a test. But you do have to be able to defend your point. Okay? All right.